Good morning. This video is going to discuss about the research questionnaires and instruments. The objective of this topic is to understand the link forged between the management dilemma and the communication instrument with the management research question hierarchy, the influence of the communication method and instrument design, the three general classes of information and what each contribute to the instrument, the influence of question content, wording, response strategy, and preliminary analysis planning on question construction, each of the numerous question design issues influencing instrument quality, reliability, and validity, the sources for measurement questions, and the importance of pretesting questions and instruments. According to a specific researchers, he said that choosing and developing the appropriate research instrument is dependent on the research problem and information that needs to be gathered. This perspective from a specific researcher is telling us that in formulating a research instrument, it would always depend on the kind of research problem we have and the relevant information that we need to have for the consumption of our study. Before we will go deeply about the topic, let us define first the subject matters, which are questionnaire and instrument, in order for us to have an overview of the topic. What is questionnaire? Questionnaire is a series of questions designed to draw out information who is filled in by all participants in the sample. It can be gathered by either oral interview or by written questionnaires. And what is instrument then? Instrument described as a device used to collect the data. This is the overall flow chart for instrument design. This is a suggested flow chart for instrument design. The procedures followed in developing an instrument vary from study to study, but the flow chart suggests three phases. Each phase is discussed in this chapter, starting with the research question hierarchy. This chart is the instrument design phase 1. The management research question hierarchy is the foundation of the research process and also of successful instrument development. By this stage in a research project, the process of moving from the general management dilemma to specific measurement question has traveled through the first three question levels: the management question, the research question, the investigative questions, and the measurement questions. Management question is the dilemma stated in question form that the manager needs resolved. Research question is the fact-based translation of the question the researcher must answer to contribute to the solution of the management questions. Investigative questions, these are specific questions the researcher must answer to provide sufficient detail and coverage of the research question. Within this level, there may be several questions as the researcher moves from the general to the specific. Measurement questions are questions participants must answer if the researcher is to gather the needed information and resolve the management question. Normally, once the researcher understands the connection between the investigative questions and the potential measurement questions, a strategy for the survey is the next logical step. This proceeds to getting down to the particulars of instrument design. The following are prominent among strategic concerns. What type of scale is needed to perform the desired analysis to answer the management questions? What communication approach will be used? Should the question be structured, unstructured, or some combination? Or should the questioning be disguised or undisguised? Technology has also affected the survey development process, not just the method of the survey's delivery. Today's software, hardware, and intranet infrastructures allow researchers to write questionnaires more quickly by tapping question banks for appropriate tested questions, create visually driven instruments that enhance the process for the participant, use questionnaire software that eliminates separate manual data entry, and build questionnaires that save time in data analysis. Another consideration in communication instrument design is whether the purpose of the study should be disguised. A disguised question is designed to conceal the question's true purpose. Some degree of disguise is often present in survey questions, especially to shield the study sponsor. We disguise the sponsor and the objective of a study if the researcher believes that participants will respond differently than they would if both or either was known. The decision about when to use disguised questions within surveys may be made easier by identifying four situations where disguising the study objective is or is not an issue. If it is willingly shared, a conscious level information, subconscious level information, knowable or limited conscious level information, reluctantly shared conscious level information. Researchers are concerned with adequate coverage of the topic and with securing the information in its most usable form. A good way to test how well the study plan meets those needs is to develop a dummy tables that display the data one expects to secure. For example, we might be interested to know whether age influences the use of convenience foods. The dummy table would match the age ranges of participants with the degree to which they use convenience foods. For example, if ages 18 to 24 always use or rarely use of convenience foods, the preliminary analysis plan serves as a check on whether the planned measurement questions meet the data needs of the researcher questions. This also happens the researcher determine the type of scale needed for each question. This flowchart is for instrument design phase 2. Drafting or selecting questions begins once you develop a complete list of investigative questions and decide on the collection processes to be used. The creation of a survey question is not a haphazard or arbitrary process. It is exacting and requires paying significant attention to detail and simultaneously addressing numerous issues. In phase 2, we will generate specific measurement, questions considering its subject content, the wording of each question, and each response strategy. The order, type, and wording of the measurement questions, the introduction, the instructions, the transitions, and the closure in a quality communication instrument should accomplish the following. First, encourage each participant to provide accurate responses. Second, encourage each participant to provide an adequate amount of information. Discourage each participant from refusing to answer specific questions. Discourage each participant from early discontinuation of participation, and leave the participant with a positive attitude about survey participation. If you could observe, the flowchart is indicating the three types of measurement questions, and we will discuss them one by one. Questionnaires can range from those that have a great deal of structure to those that are unstructured. They contain three categories of measurement questions. These are administrative, classification, and target. Administrative questions identify the participant, interviewer's location, and conditions. These questions are rarely asked for the participant but are necessary for studying patterns within the data and identify possible error sources. Classification questions usually cover sociological demographic variables that allow participants' answers to be grouped so that patterns are revealed and can be studied. These questions usually appear at the end of a survey. And target questions address the investigative questions of a specific study. These are grouped by topic in the survey. Target questions may be structured or unstructured. Question content is first and foremost dictated by the investigative questions guiding the study. From these questions, questionnaire designers craft or borrow the target and classification questions that will be asked of participants. There are activities that the researcher must accomplish to make experiment a success. In the first step, the researcher is challenged to first select variables that are best operational definitions of the original concepts, determine how many variables to test, and select or design appropriate measures for the chosen variables. The selection of measures for testing requires a thorough review of the available literature and instruments. In an experiment, participants experience a manipulation of the independent variable called the experimental treatment. The treatment levels are the arbitrary or natural groups the researcher makes within the independent variable. A control group can provide a base level of comparison. A control group is a group of participants that is measured but not exposed the independent variable being studied. Environmental control means holding the physical environment of the experiment constant. When participants do not know if they are receiving the experimental treatment, they are said to be blind. When neither the participant nor the researcher knows, the experiment is said to be double-blind. The design is then selected. Several designs are discussed on the next several slides. The participants selected for the experiment should be representative of the population to which the researcher wishes to generalize the study's result. Random assignment is required to make the groups as comparable as possible. In formulating a question, these should be considered. Should this question be asked? Is the question of proper scope and coverage? Can the participant adequately answer this question as asked? Will the participant willingly answer this question as asked? It is frustrating when people misunderstand a question that has been painstakingly written. This problem is partially due to the lack of shared vocabulary. We can point out several areas that cause participant confusion and measurement error. Survey questions should be revised until they satisfy these criteria: shared vocabulary, single meaning, misleading assumptions, biased, personalized, inadequate alternatives. Is the question stated in terms of a shared vocabulary? Does the question contain vocabulary with a single meaning? Does the question contain unsupported or misleading assumptions? Does the question contain biased wording? Is the question correctly personalized? Are adequate alternatives presented within the question? Several situational factors affect the decision of whether to use open-ended or closed questions. The decision is also affected by the degree to which these factors are known to the interviewer. In choosing response options in questions, researchers must consider these factors: objectives of the study, the participants' level of information, the degree to which participants have thought through topic, ease and clarity with participant communicates, and participants' motivation to share. And now let's discuss the different response strategy. The first response strategy is free response questions or strategy, also known as open-ended questions. Ask the participant a question and either the interviewer pauses for the answer or the participant records his or her ideas in his or her own words in the space provided on a questionnaire. Researchers try to reduce the number of these questions as they are difficult to interpret and are costly to analyze. The second response strategy is dichotomous questions, are measurement questions that offer two mutually exclusive and exhaustive alternatives. The next response strategy is multiple choice response strategy. These are appropriate when there are more than two alternatives or where we seek gradations of preference, interest, or agreement. A problem can occur with this question type when one or more responses have not been anticipated. A second problem occurs when the list of choices is not exhaustive. Participants may also feel that they have multiple answers while the question allows for only one response. In this case, the response choices are not mutually exclusive. The order in which choices are given can also cause bias. Order bias with non-numeric response categories often leads the participant to choose the first alternative or the primacy effect, or the last alternative or the recency effect over the middle ones. Primacy effects dominate in visual surveys, while recency effects dominate oral surveys. Multiple choice questions usually generate nominal data. The checklist response strategy is a question that possesses numerous alternatives and encourage multiple and ordered responses. Checklists are efficient and provided nominal data. Rating question strategy asks the participant to position each factor on a companion scale, either verbal, numeric, or graphic. It is important to remember that the researcher should represent only one response dimension in rating scale response options. Otherwise, effectively, you present the participant with a double-barreled question with insufficient choices to reply to both aspects. When relative order or the alternatives is important, the ranking question is ideal. The ranking question is a measurement question that asks the participant to compare and order two or more objects or properties using a numerical scale. It is always best to have participants rank only those elements with which they are familiar. For this reason, ranking questions might follow a checklist question which identifies the objects of familiarity. Avoid asking participants to rank more than 7 times. Ranking generates ordinal data. A review of literature will reveal instruments used in similar studies that may be obtained by writing to the researchers, or if copyrighted, may be purchased through a clearinghouse. Instruments also are available through compilations and source books. While these tend to be oriented to social science applications, they are a rich source of ideas for tailoring questions to meet managers' needs. This scale type summarizes some important considerations in choosing between the various response strategies. While all of the response strategies are available for use in web questionnaires, there are slightly different layout options for response in web surveys. Handbook of Marketing Scales, the Gallup Poll Cumulative Index, Measures of Personality and Social Psychological Attitudes, Measures of Political Attitudes, Index to International Public Opinion, Sourcebook of Harris National Surveys, Marketing Scales Handbook, and American Social Attitudes Data Sourcebook. These sources of questions from books and websites. This slide highlights many of the books listed, which may be used as our basis in formulating questions. This is the flowchart for instrument design phase 3. This is an instrument design which includes a multi-step process, which includes the following. First, develop the participant screening process along with the introduction. A screen question is a question to qualify the participant's knowledge about the target questions of interest or experience necessary to participate. Second, arrange the measurement questions in a sequence. First, identify groups of target questions by topic. Establish a logical sequence for the question groups and questions within groups, and develop transitions between these question groups. Third, prepare and insert instructions including termination instructions, skip directions, and probes. Fourth, create and insert a conclusion including a survey disposition statement. And lastly, pre-test specific questions and the instrument as a whole. The question process must quickly awaken interest and motivate the participant to participate in the interview. More interesting topical target questions should come early. Classification questions that are not used as filters or screens should come at the end of the survey. The participants should not be confronted by early requests for information that might be considered personal or ego-threatening. Buffer questions are neutral measurement questions designed to establish rapport with the participant. These can be used prior to sensitive questions. The questioning process should begin with the simple items and then move to the more complex, as well as move from the general items to the more specific, taxing and challenging questions later in the questioning process. Changes in the frame of references should be small and should be clearly pointed out. Use transition statements between different topics of the target question set. The following are the guidelines in the question sequencing. First, interesting topics early, classification questions later, sensitive questions later, simple items early, transition between topics, and reference changes limited. The procedure of moving from general to more specific questions is sometimes called the funnel approach. The objectives of this procedure are to learn the participant's frame of reference and to extract a full range of desired information while limiting the distortion effect of earlier questions on later ones. These are the questions for illustrating the funnel approach. How do you think this country is getting along in its relations with other countries? How do you think we are doing in our relations with Iran? Do you think we ought to be dealing with Iran differently than we are now? If yes, what should we be doing differently? Some people say we should get tougher with Iran, and others think we are too tough as it is. How do you feel about it? Sometimes the content of one question assumes other questions have been asked and answered. This is a branch question. In web surveys, branching allows for respondents to avoid skip patterns. Based on their answers, respondents are branched to the appropriate section of the survey. Web surveys also allow for piping. Piping takes the answer from one question and uses the answer in a later question. For instance, if in one question, a respondent named Diet Coke as his or her favorite beverage, a later question might ask, which is your favorite characteristic of Diet Coke? This table illustrates the components of communication instruments. Instructions to the interviewer or participant attempt to ensure that all participants are treated equally. Two principles form the foundation for good instructions: clarity and courtesy. Instruction language needs to be unfailingly simple and polite. Instruction topics include those for 1. Terminating an unqualified participant, 2. Terminating a discontinued interview, 3. Moving between questions on an instrument, and disposing of a completed questionnaire. The role of a conclusion is to leave the participant with the impression that his or her involvement has been valuable. MindWriter Survey has recently created a service and repair programs in companies. It's a complete care for its portable computers for providing rapid response to customer service problems. There is no substitution for a thorough understanding of a question wording, question content, and question sequencing issues. However, the researcher can do several things to help improve survey results. These are listed in the slide. Build rapport, redesign question process, explore alternatives, use other methods, and pre-test. Most information can be secured by direct, undisguised questioning if rapport has been developed. The assurance of confidentiality can also increase participant motivation. You can redesign the questioning process to improve the quality of answers by modifying the administrative process and the response strategy. When drafting the original question, try developing positive, negative, and neutral versions of each type of question. Minimize non-responses to particular questions by recognizing the sensitivity of certain topics. The final step toward improving survey results is pre-testing. The assessment of questions and instruments before the start of a study. Pre-testing can allow one to discover ways to increase participant interest, increase the likelihood that participants will remain where researcher training is needed, and explore ways improve the overall quality of survey data. And that is all about my report, and thank you for listening.